My name is Eric Owens. I'm Director of the International Studies Program here at Boston College, and it's terrific to see so many faculty colleagues and students here as well. So thanks for being here. This is a sobering but truly important topic for us to be digging into. It's been nearly a month now since the joint American-Israeli attacks on Iran began, and the war has unfolded in complex and sometimes foreseen ways and other times unforeseen ways. And to help us make sense of this tonight is one of our faculty experts who is deeply engaged in this as an Iranian himself and as a scholar of Iran, and as one of our terrific core faculty members, Professor Ali Kadivar. Professor Kadivar is Associate Professor of Sociology and International Studies here at BC, and he's on research leave, not teaching this year at Boston College, as a fellow in the prestigious Radcliffe Institute at Harvard this year, working on a book about democracy and politics in Iran. You can imagine that he's been in much demand in the media as well as among faculty and scholars around the world for his insights. His background includes the authorship of a book in 2022 called Popular Politics and the Path to Durable Democracy. And Iran was one of the core case studies there, looking at social movements and in particular resistance of democratic movements to external pressures, something we're seeing a lot that we'll talk about tonight as well. He has a Substack that has been getting a lot of attention recently with some very thoughtful essays that have been cited by other very important scholars and policymakers as well. And it's called Popular Politics, Unbound. I encourage you all to check it out. I'm sure he'd give you access for free if it's not already free, but we encourage students and colleagues to pay attention. And he's also online on X at Ali Kadivar. So you can engage some of his contemporary thinking on this, but tonight we have a special privilege of having his extended thoughts. He'll speak for maybe 20 minutes or so, giving us some historical, sociological, political background, as well as contemporary views on what's exactly happening. And then we're going to leave the remaining of our hour tonight for questions with you. So please write down questions that you have. He's here as a teacher, mentor, faculty colleague to help all of us understand this better. I want to thank Kathy Bailey and the Islamic Civilization and Societies program for co-sponsoring. Professor Kadivar also is a core faculty member in ICS. So thank you all for being here, and with that, Professor Kadivar.
Thank you, Eric, for the generous introduction, and thank you everyone for coming here. It's my pleasure to speak with you about this topic, tragic topic. So I am Iranian American, and I'm experiencing this from two sides, two countries that I feel belonging to are at war with each other. And so I'll look at this from two sides, more from the Iranian side, meaning what is happening there, but we can't just look at there. I was thinking about the experience of war. I was born under Iran-Iraq war. I had the experiences of running away from Iraqi airplanes coming or missiles hitting civilian areas. And that war was between 1980 and 1988. But when I look back at Iran's modern history, I see that Iran has gone through wars in cycles. Throughout Iran's long history, but let's take just modern history. If we start from 19th century, or if we start from 20th century, every Iranian witnesses and experiences two major wars in their life: World War I, World War II, Iran-Iraq War, and this. America also goes to a lot of wars, more than Iran. Pretty much all the time, American military is engaged in war somewhere. But our experiences are very different here because those wars are not fought on American soil, with the exception of Pearl Harbor. So we don't know how it feels for the other side. They're usually, or often, wars of aggression. We read about it in news, and we hear more or experience it more when there are American soldiers that come back, or there are American soldiers that are killed on the battlefield. So it's mostly reading, news, conversations, or right now when the war leads to a spike in the fuel prices. That's when we experience it directly in our life. We can maybe in the question and answer talk about why this war happened. Now, for my big introduction, I try to present you short history of wars and their consequences in Iran. And then I'm sure we'll get through questions about why this war is being waged on Iran and what is also happening in the war. Those are things I want to talk about today. Probably you also want to know about those things. But let me start from early 19th century. Iran had a series of wars with Russia and imperial power. This is a pattern we see in Iran's modern history, these military encounters with imperial powers. In those wars, Iran lost, and it lost territory. All the Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, these are all independent countries now. They were part of the Iranian Empire. Iran lost them to the Russian Empire at the time. And this question came for the Iranian elite, that why are we failing in these wars? Why are we losing? We need to be strong. And the answer they came up with was that we have to adopt a constitutional framework, adopt democracy, write a constitution, modernize, so then we can be strong, so these European powers don't come right and left and take advantage of us. The war with Russia, of course, was not the only war of 19th century. There were also wars with Britain. Iran even didn't have borders with Britain. Britain at the time was the major superpower. Afghanistan was separated in Iran during those wars. Then there were wars with the Ottoman Empire. And then comes Iran's constitutional revolution, which was culmination of these questions, this project that how can we keep Iran's sovereignty and keep Iran immune from imperial interventions. In the constitutional revolution of 1906, Iran adopted the constitution, parliament for the first time emerged in Iran, and a series of political and social reforms started in the country. But this was short-lived. Again, the achievements of constitutional revolution basically collapsed under external pressure again. The peak of the external pressure is World War I. In World War I, Iran announced impartial, but it was occupied by Russia and by Britain. This was not just an occupation, it led to famine. Hundreds of thousands, even millions of Iranians died in the famine. And it was really the collapse of the constitutional revolution. So there was chaos, state weakness. In this context emerged centralization of power under a person that was called Reza Khan. This person became the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty. Pahlavi dynasty is the last monarchical dynasty that ruled Iran before Islamic Republic, until 1979. So Reza Shah came to power also with British support through a coup. At this level, we also see that the level of imperial intervention in Iran increases beyond. Before that, they wanted to get oil, they wanted to get tobacco resources. At this point, they started to directly deciding who is going to be Iran's head of the state, who is going to be head of government. Very similar to what Trump has been saying lately, that we want to have a saying in who's Iran's supreme leader is, or who's Venezuela's president is. So Reza Shah, again, concentrated power in his hand, but his geopolitical thinking changed and he developed sympathies with Germany, and came the time of World War II. Iran again announced impartiality, but this was violated again. Soviet from the north, US and Britain from the south occupied Iran and deposed Reza Shah. So this is the second direct intervention at the level of head of the state. They removed head of the state in Iran, and his young son became Iran's new king, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. He was the last king or Shah of Iran. This period was actually the only exceptional period when foreign intervention opened up political space, because they removed the major dictator. There was a period of competition and opening, electoral participation, social mobilization, and so on. But this opening, this fragile democracy was only tolerated by the United States and Britain until they turned against their interests. And that was the point then Iran nationalized oil in 1951. This threatened the vital interest of Britain and US because the matter was very simple. When Iran nationalized its oil, it meant that those countries had to just pay more for Iranian oil, which would have led to other countries nationalize and an increase in the price of oil. So you see, this issue about oil is not new at all. This struggle over Iran's natural resources that the imperial powers had interest in. So the response was another coup that was sponsored by MI6 and CIA, brought down Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. He was secular, he was popular, and he was one of the elite of the constitutional revolution. This, I would say, was the last moment of constitutionalist project to try to advocate for Iran's sovereignty under a democratic and constitutionalist project. From this point onward, the political projects basically shifts. The question of sovereignty does not drop in Iran, but with Iran transitioned from a constitutional democratic project to uphold sovereignty to an Islamist authoritarian project to uphold sovereignty. Of course, there is historical detail how that happened, but 1953 really changed Iranian sentiments about America. Iranians had negative sentiments about great powers and imperial powers because they had taken advantage of the country. But their perception of the United States at the time was that United States is a rising power. We can ally with the US or get help from them in our struggle against Russia and against Britain. But this was not the case. This was also the beginning of the Cold War, so the dynamics of the international system was rapidly changing, and I think Iranian elites did not understand that there is a whole new world order. The anti-American sentiments that were formed were a major context for the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which was a revolution about, again, despotism and dictatorship of Pahlavi, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, because again, the young king, also concentrated power is in his hands. He had friendly relations with the United States, with also all the other great powers, with Soviet, with China. But he had a legitimacy deficit. Many Iranians believed he was an American puppet. He didn't represent the will of Iranian nation. So 1979 was both a revolution against despotism, but also it was an anti-colonial revolution, anti-imperialist revolution, in that sense that Iranians did not want the great powers, particularly the United States, to intervene in the domestic matters of politics and governance in Iran. This led to the takeover of the American embassy by Islamist students, which was supported by the Iranian government, and this opened a new phase in the hostilities between Iran and the US. Soon after the takeover of the embassy, Iraq invaded Iran in the upheaval and chaos that had happened after the revolution. So, and 8 years of war with Iraq continued. Initially, at that point, Iraq was an ally of the Soviet Union. It had assistance from Soviet weapons and so on. But as the war went forward, initially Saddam's also calculation, similar to the US, was that in 2 weeks they can capture Tehran, and the government in Iran is weak because they just had a revolution. There were purges in the military, and the Iran and US relations had basically unraveled in that point. So they thought there are signs of weakness. This was a miscalculation. So it took Iran a couple of years to regroup, and Iran took back lost territories and then went in offense in Iraq. At that point, United States worried that Iran is getting too powerful. US and Europe started sharing intelligence with Iraq and weapons. So Iraq used chemical weapons against Iran and its own population, and this was with the assistance of the United States and European powers. No reaction from the United Nations, no reactions from the Security Council. In that war, Iran also had a problem with weaponry. they didn't have missiles. Iraq had missiles. Iraq would buy weaponry from other countries. No country was selling missiles or defense system or anything to Iraq. So that was the beginning of them thinking that they need to produce their own missiles and basically weaponry. They also saw that as a proxy war. They didn't think they were just fighting against Iraq. They thought that Iraq is supported by the United States and other great powers, so they saw that also as an imperial war. The war shaped Iran's domestic politics. When the war started, there were the nationalist faction and there were Islamist factions, there were leftists, but the war presented an opportunity for Islamists to suppress other groups and saying they are cooperating with the enemy or these are imperatives of the wartime, there should be unity, there shouldn't be contestation and so on. Some of the institutions that were pivotal for Iran in fighting that war were Revolutionary Guards and Basij militias. You might have heard about this. These were very small organizations when the war started, and they were kind of disorganized. They were young people. During the war, they grew, and they turned to major power players. And since then, their power has grown. This is how Revolutionary Guards grew really. Expanded. Iran's now previous leader, Ali Khamenei, was president at the time. He also he was going to the war fronts. He started making relations with Revolutionary Guards at the time. And he also made a profile of a wartime leader. He was not a top or senior elite, but he was able to elevate himself. And this was part of the context for when he was then chosen as Iran's supreme leader in 1989. The point I'm trying to say is that wars are not just about the military give and take. The political formations change, new political actors emerge, and usually this is in the direction of militarization. Usually militaries become more powerful, not just militarily, but they also gain political influence afterwards. So since then Iran and US have gone between episodes of hostility and cooperation. You might be surprised, Iran and US relations, even after the revolution, has not been all 100% hostile. When United States invaded Afghanistan, Iran actually cooperated and provided logistical support. And the person who was leading the Iranian initiative was Qasem Soleimani, who was then later, some years ago, assassinated by American troops with the order of President Trump. But soon after that, this was perceived as a moment that these two countries are coming together. Soon after, George W. Bush put Iran as part of the axis of evil. This is the time, so 20 years ago, when this type of, we saw the invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11. Invasion of Afghanistan and invasion of Iraq. So then the relations were not good again. Iran also continued its nuclear program. It didn't start under Islamic Republic. Nuclear program started under Pahlavi. Iran came under sanctions, and then in 2015 there was a historic moment that Iran and US again directly negotiated with other European countries, and the nuclear deal was reached under President Obama. It was a concern for United States. Basically, United States doesn't want any more countries to have nuclear weapons. And the deal was basically ensuring supervision, inspections on Iran. There was a maximum level of uranium enrichment, which was 3.5%, and Iran signed this and Iran abided by this. But then presidency changed here. President Trump came into office and he said this was not a good deal, so he violated the deal, and he started a campaign of maximum pressure on Iran, which included putting sanctions on Iranian oil and basically cutting Iran from banking system, global banking system. This really deteriorated Iranian economy, inflation. I mean, we are upset about inflation here, which is probably, I don't know, what's the percentage? It's 1 digit. It's less than 10, or maybe it's less than 5. Since 2017 and campaign of maximum pressure, Iran has had over 40% inflation every year. And the currency exchange rate has also dropped. The poverty has increased. Millions of Iranians have entered poverty. I was seeing this research article in Lancet. Lancet is the leading medical journal last year. It's not about Iran, it's about the impact of sanctions. They used, the authors used methods of causal identification to see what are the health effects of sanctions. And you can go see all the details, but what I remember is that the unilateral sanctions, most of the unilateral sanctions are done by the United States, every year results in the death of about 500,000 people. Most of these are children under 3 years of age. So these are some of the costs that this happens to Iran, this happens to Cuba, this happens to Venezuela. And then, well, Trump then lost. Biden came back. Biden didn't change anything about the sanctions. The sanction regime stayed in power. And then Trump came back. But in this time, also we had October 7, and basically changing equations in the Middle East. Like since October 7, Israel has started a series of wars with no red limit. Basically, the United States has said there's no red limit for Israel. And since Israel has bombed or invaded multiple Middle Eastern countries, so Palestine, that was happening, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Qatar, Iran, that's 6 countries. Yemen, I forgot. So 7 countries. And so, and now they're talking about that Turkey is going to be next after the Iranian threat is neutralized. And now you might have read there's part of the conversation in the US that this war is happening because of Israeli influence. It's hard. The American administration has not been consistent in saying what are the objectives of the war. The objectives of war has changed every day. On the first day was regime change. On another day was degrading Iran's military capacity. On another day, Donald Trump wants total surrender, capitulation. One day he says the map of Iran is going to change. So what we are observing is basically the lack of strategy, the lack of objectives. In Iraq war and in Afghanistan war, there was a strategy, there was planning, and there was authorization by Congress. The other part is that there hasn't been, when, according to the law here, when government wants to go to the war, there should be authorization by Congress. None of this happened. So when all of this happened, those wars resulted in disaster. The invasion of Iraq initially brought down Saddam Hussein, so it led to the regime change, but what unfolded after was disastrous. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed either directly by American forces or in the civil wars that followed. This created ongoing instability. ISIS emerged in the context of instability in Iraq. And in Afghanistan, the joke goes that US went to war for 20 years and replaced Taliban with Taliban. Because Taliban was in power, they were defeated, they fought for 20 years, and they came back a few years ago. And the joke that goes in Iran was that it took the progress is that in 20 years, United States replaced Taliban with Taliban. In Iran, it took 6 days to replace Khamenei with Khamenei. So, I think this gives us a brief history. I'm happy to unpack any part of it. If we have time, I can talk a little about where the war is at right now.
Yeah, we'll do 5 minutes on that, and then we'll open up.
Okay. So this has been, if you have paid attention to the news, in some sense, US and Israel have won a lot of battles. On the first day of the war, they killed head of the state. This is, of course, a big blow to your enemy. Several Iranian commanders and civilian leaders have been bombed and assassinated. But, and then they are saying thousands of targets have been hit, many of them military targets, many schools have been hit, many hospitals have been hit. And oil reserves next to Tehran was hit, which created a huge explosion, and then acid rain that came down days after. The South Pars petrochemical field was hit, which is a shared field with Qatar, and Israel was supposed not to hit Qatar anymore. So in that sense, Iran has been really damaged in the war, and the damage and devastation is significant, and there will be, unfortunately, remaining environmental impact. There will be remaining political impact, but there will be remaining environmental impact. So regardless of regime change happens or not, whoever lives in that land, which will be Iranians, will suffer. Research after invasion of Iraq has shown that in certain areas of Iraq, the rates of cancer has increased because of all the explosions, because of all the toxic and chemicals that have been released in the area. There are already, I was just seeing a report in Guardian about the massive emission of CO2 in Iran because of all the explosions. So in that sense, Iran has been really pounded. But you also know that the war, Iran is not being defeated at the time. Iran has responded in three levels, I would say. At the level of the political elite, political institution, at the public mobilizational level, and the military level. At the political level, at the level of the government, what we have observed is that despite decapitation and killing of leaders, the regime has remained intact. All of the leaders that were killed have been replaced, pretty much in each case with more hawkish new leaders. I mean, Khamenei's son is not a popular figure. Iranians have been chanted slogans against him. But what happened with killing of Khamenei on the first day of war, he basically turned to a martyr. He is the wartime leader that was killed on the day of the war. His men are fighting still. And now Mojtaba, who before was his son, was not the leader. Before he was just the son of the leader, people were not happy to have hereditary succession. But you know, it was not only Khamenei that was killed. They bombed his residence. His wife was there, his daughter was there, his son was there, and his granddaughter was there. The whole family was killed. So Mojtaba that became leader now have the charisma of being the son of the martyred family. And this was the major context that he was chosen. He was also favored by the Revolutionary Guards. Obviously, Revolutionary Guards has had a lot of influence, but their influence now is to the roof because they are fighting the war. In wars, whoever that is fighting the war gets the last say. So at the political level, the system has rotated the elite. It has, the institutional functioning has not disrupted. At the same time, government supporters have been filling squares and streets. So the government loyalists have been very mobilized to the highest level. This is something Iranian government has been good at in mobilizing their supporters. It has been important. They have used them to respond to protests, to intimidate opposition. But now it is very important for them because part of the campaign, the air campaign has been that Mossad gave, this was in New York Times, Mossad had a plan that they can incite an insurrection in Iran again. They can bring people to the street. This has not galvanized. I think for different reasons. Part of it was the bloody repression of the protests in January. People are scared, they don't want to be killed. But the other side of it is that the streets are not empty. Government supporters are already in the street. And what is, I think, remarkable is that the streets are not even safe for government supporters. When you watch their videos of being in the street, there's like a bomb in the next street. There is a smoke going up. So you just imagine you're these people. This makes you believe a lot more in your cause. And now your leader also has been sacrificed. So the discourse of martyrdom is not a joke for these people. So I would say they are emboldened. Both the elite of Revolutionary Islamic Republic is emboldened. Their supporters are also emboldened. And then comes the military response. So Iran had warned US and Israel not to start this war. And they had specifically said that this war is going to be a regional war and the Strait of Hormuz will be closed. So what does it mean, regional war? It meant that Iran, they call it horizontal escalation. In the June war, the June war was started by Israel. US was standing on the side. First, US said we didn't have anything to do with it, but then they entered and they bombed Iran's nuclear facilities. This time, US entered from the beginning. So in addition of hitting Israel, Iran also started hitting all American bases in the Gulf region, and all the other assets that they believe are used for this. So part of it are the radars, are the data banks. Some of the Amazon data banks have been hit, and anywhere that they believe there is some activities going on. So this has really damaged the economy of the Gulf region, because these like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, they have been a tourism hub, so safety really is important. They have been presenting and becoming investment hub. Obviously now investment is very risky in these areas, and United States was contracted to provide security for the Gulf region. Now it's becoming kind of clear to the Gulf region that U.S. is more a liability, because it starts these wars without consulting with their partners in the region, and now they have to pay the price. So the horizontal escalation is part of it, and Iran has, despite all of the bombing of various nuclear missile facilities and military facilities, Iran has retained its capacity to shoot missiles back, and they are still hitting targets. And the other part is closing the Strait of Hormuz. You might have read about this or know about this, so it would be good to have a map, but the Strait of Hormuz is where all of the oil from all these Gulf countries and all the shippings has to go through this. And Iran has a long coastline all over the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. The Strait of Hormuz is between Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. And it's not physically blocked. It's just the threats that if a ship goes through, Iran can hit this with drones and with high-speed boats. The other side of this war has been that Iran has changed the military equation here, because this is an asymmetric war. So Iran does not have very expensive weaponry here. The weapons all the weapons they use, they have produced them themselves, and they are cheaply produced. So when they use a drone, you may have heard of these Shahed drones. They say a Shahed drone costs $20,000. And then an interceptor that Americans and Israelis or these Gulf regions use is like $1 million. So what Iran is doing is increasing the cost of the war for the adversaries. And their idea is that we are getting damaged more, but our pain tolerance is higher. And we will just keep this going until the cost for the other side increases, until they don't have tolerance for it. So closing the Strait of Hormuz has quickly resulted in increase in the price of oil. It has also fertilizers also go through Strait of Hormuz in addition to other commodities. So what we are actually seeing now, that the price of oil has been doubled, we can see it in gas station. This is just the beginning of it. We will see the real problem in 6 months, because this is disrupting the supply chain for the whole energy market, and the energy is related to the whole economy. Already the stock market is down, if you're following it. It's going to get worse. Why is Iran doing this? Iran doesn't want another war. So the whole thing about nuclear weapon for Iran to have it was to create deterrence. They didn't have it. If they had it, they would use it, and there wouldn't be a war. They don't have it. What they are trying to do is to create deterrence through the Strait of Hormuz, which is, it's comparing with what else is happening in this war is non-violent. It's not, they're not actually destroying ships that are going through, because the ships are so expensive. There's a ship is like $1 billion or millions of dollars. Just the thought that they think there could be an Iranian drone coming at them, it stops them. And this has now turned to economic benefit for Iran, because Iranian ships go through the Strait of Hormuz because they're not get hit by Iranian drones. So since the start of the war, Iran is selling more oil for a higher price, and Iran is also getting a toll from the ships that it's allowing to go. I saw that $2 million per. So this has already, looks like Iran has created a strategic advantage for itself. And US also first lifted sanctions on Russia because the matter about oil prices is that the supply is diminishing. So with lifting sanctions on Russian oil, US was trying to increase the amount of oil in the market. That was not enough. So US also gave a sanction relief to Iran to sell its oil. So what Iranians couldn't achieve through negotiations, they are achieving through wars. And let me say something about negotiations, because you know that both the June war and this war started when there was negotiation going on. And on the last day of negotiation, which was a Friday, Iran made some concessions that were very significant. They basically gave up on stockpiling enriched uranium. And the foreign minister of Oman was there. He said that Iran made this significant concession and this war is on the US and Israel. And there was a British diplomat on the negotiations. He also said the same thing. Some people, some former, Jake Sullivan was a former member of the State Department. He said it's likely that the American negotiators even did not understand what the concession that Iran made was, because Witkoff and Kushner, these are neither diplomats, neither technicians in the nuclear matter. So it's very likely that they even didn't know what was going on in the conversation, in the negotiations. I think eventually there have to be some sort of settlement and ceasefire, but it's not very clear. There are talks about it, but for both parties, they have to come down and settle on something in between. Iranians don't want a ceasefire that would lead into a war in 6 or 3 months, so they want some sort of guarantee. But still, Donald Trump is talking about capitulation, and now there are conversations about the ground invasion in the weekend. U.S. is thinking of invading, capturing Hart Island. It's an island that Iran keeps most of its oil reserve there, and another island in the Strait of Hormuz. I honestly don't think Iranians would capitulate and surrender. I think this must have been very clear by now. This just escalate. If the US escalates, they would escalate more, and this could be very dangerous, because if US starts hitting power plants, meaning electricity factory, oil factory, this would of course affect civilian population. Hospitals would stop working, people's just gonna die, people wouldn't have access to sanitary water and so on. And something that we kind of have forgotten here is that this is a war crime. And now, just in public, American president and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, they openly just are threatening of war crimes. I mean, the whole war itself is a violation of international law. I mean, based on the Charter of the United Nations, members of the United Nations should not attack each other unless there is an imminent threat. And Iran was not an imminent threat. According to Donald Trump himself, the nuclear program of Iran was obliterated in June, and Iran was not preparing for a war. Iran's economy was in a shamble. They were just like scrambling together to deal with the recent protests. But the equations have changed, and we can talk about it more when you have questions.
Thank you.
Hi, happy late New Year. My question is related to, I guess, both like diplomacy and the people's perception of Reza Pahlavi. And this is a two-part question, so feel free to answer either part or both. The first part is, why do you think there's such a fascination with Reza Pahlavi both within Iran and the diaspora, to a point where he immediately emerged as the only option once the Islamic regime, or if the Islamic regime goes down, where they didn't even consider anyone like within Iran to kind of grab or take over if there's a power vacuum? And then my second question is, if there is a regime change, what are the probability of Trump instating Reza Pahlavi within the Iranian government?
Yeah, great question. So Reza Pahlavi is the son of Iran's deposed Shah. Mohammad Reza Shah that I talked about was toppled in 1979. His son, his name is Reza Pahlavi. He's been exiled since, and his profile has been going up recently. I think multiple reasons. One is the domestic repression that the hardliners in Iran really discredited the reformists. They repressed activists in Iran, journalists, put them in prison. They did everything to decredit them. So the activists within Iran kind of lost public presentation of themselves. On the other hand, outside Iran, there was these foreign-funded televisions, Manoto and Iran International. They also started around the same time that this campaign of maximum pressure on Iran started. And they have been presenting a nostalgic picture of Pahlavi era. There was social freedom at the time. People could drink. There were no restrictions of clothing and so on. So people watch those videos and say, oh, this life looks good, even though there were a small fraction of population that had access to those privileges at the time. There's not much conversation about the political repression and the other problems that people had. And part of it is desperation. Iranians want a better life, they want a normal life, and there is not an easy option. Reza Pahlavi somehow is presenting an easy, quick option. It's something that has happened before. He's not saying that I'm creating something new for you that you don't know. So I'm bringing back the glory of the Pahlavi era. But this has not been organic. This has been these foreign TVs that have been presenting him and promoting him. But he doesn't have, he would have been only an option if we are actually sending ground troops to capture Tehran, and then we would bring him to rule over Iran, which in that case, I don't think he would be successful anymore. But he doesn't have enough support in Iran to even initiate a protest. So in January, after he called on people, a lot of people came to the street. But that was 2 weeks into the protest, when protests had already started and people were coming out. In many other occasions, he has asked people to come out and no one comes out. So he was like kind of playing. He was playing on a episode of mobilization that had already started, and he himself hasn't had any particular He's a wealthy man, but he hasn't done anything remarkable with his wealth. He doesn't have a political organization. He's an Israeli project, and even Trump hasn't accepted him. They have presented him several times to Trump, which is an embarrassment for Pahlavi. But Trump says, yeah, he's a nice guy, but someone in Iran would be better. And if regime change happens, this will not be easy at all, a regime change in Iran. You can see that Khamenei was killed and the regime kept fighting. So what Iranians have done in terms of military organization, they call it a mosaic military structure, because they know that there will be attempts by the United States and Israel for decapitation. So already Iranian military has decentralized command. They designed this exactly for what happened on the first day of the war. Because in June, Iranians were not ready. It took them like a few days to scramble together to start shooting missiles and create some sort of deterrence. This time, killing the head of the state didn't change anything about functioning of the military structure. So even in the case that, let's say, American army deploys tens of thousands, or how many soldiers are needed. Iran is a country of 90 million, so you need a lot of troops to go there. Even if they capture Tehran, the defeat will not be total. I think different units, Basij, Revolutionary Guards, will fight back. So I think regime change will certainly go through civil war, and this is the pattern of regime changes. There's a book by Alexander Down. It's called Catastrophic Success, because even when in cases like Iraq and Afghanistan, you have an initial success of bringing down the regime, the problems start later. all of these cases of regime change from basically regime change from above through military intervention doubles the chance of civil war in a country. And I think Reza Pahlavi, there would be an opposition to him from the educated class. He has support from the educated class, but from also ethnic minorities in Iran. Kurds, Arabs, Turks, they would not, I think at least part of them would resist his project. So he would be, I think, very divisive figure. I think the best thing he can do is to create a political party. This is what his father and his grandfather didn't do. I think the best thing he can do is to create a political party and have a reading of what Pahlavi dynasty did well, which there are things that they did well, like their foreign policy was reasonable, economic growth was very strong under Mohammad Reza Shah. So maybe he can create a nationalist, conservative, developmentalist party and participate in a future democratic Iran. But right now he's trying to present himself as the only leader that can lead the nation, and I don't think this project will succeed.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your insights. I had a question. There's been a lot of news recently with regards to the Strait of Hormuz and Iran allowing ships to pass if they pay the toll in Chinese yuan. And so my question is more with regards to that in the recent years there's been a lot of talk of de-dollarization in international trade, BRICS currency. So how do you see this impacting that? And what do you see as China's involvement or allyship with Iran impacting this whole situation and the economic hardship on America and trade?
Yeah, so this is one of the consequences of the campaign of maximum pressure on Iran, because Iran was basically cut from the banking system, and then Iran had to create these mediaries to sell its oil, like these third parties that would sell Iranian oil in the black market for lower price, and then they had to give back the money. But what happened that they call them in Iran terroristes, these people. They what happened in January that led to those protests was that those intermediaries were not giving Iranian dollar back. That led to a sharp decrease in the exchange rate of dollar and rial. Some believe that maybe, well, it's unclear why that happened. It could be that their own self-interest or so on and so forth. So by switching to Chinese money, they basically put aside the mediators. So then Iran is not just selling its oil in dollar; it's just exchanging it in Chinese money. But I think the broader point is that all of these campaigns of maximum pressure and sanction and military intervention, it oftentimes has some unintended consequences. I mentioned 1953. At the time, this was it was like Venezuela. It was a great success. This guy in Iran nationalized oil. Look what we did. We just sponsored the coup. He's now in prison. We have a better oil deal. But what was the long-term consequence? The emergence of Islamic Republic. The whole politics of sovereignty, anti-imperialism was institutionalized in a political regime that was way more powerful than Mossadegh, that could not have been toppled by a coup, and has lasted to this day and created so much headache for American policymakers. This is what many examples, another example I can give is when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1980s. And that was a regime change. Israel invaded Lebanon and put an Israeli-friendly government in place. But that didn't end, that government was not stable. Hezbollah emerged in southern Lebanon in resistance to Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon, which is now fighting Israel again. Israel thought that they were destroyed last year in the invasion of Lebanon, but Iran rebuilt, Revolutionary Guards rebuilt them again. So I think as long as there is imperial coercion, wars, military pressure within the Middle East or any other region, it would create some sort of resistance. This resistance would not be beautiful. It would be as ugly as the military intervention is. It just creates bigger problems, but not right at the moment. With Iran, we are seeing at the moment that this is turning to a bigger problem. In Iraq, it took a while for the bubble of success to break. In Iran, we are I mean, 4 weeks in, already we are dealing with economic crisis.
Great question. Others? Yeah.
You talked about how it's going to be like the war is necessarily a regional one, and that the Gulf states have played like a big part in that, but economically, in like the weapons they've had to invest in, and also like socially due to like the impacts of the war itself. How do you think that will shape like the Gulf states' relations with the United States?
I don't know what is going to happen, but I am hearing conversations that United States has not been a reliable partner and has failed to provide security for the Gulf region. Because they paid a ton of money to Trump. Qatar did, UAE did. So they have paid the money and they have been bombed. So if there is no security, what are they paying for? So Qatar, I think yesterday they started talking about some new security measures. I'm not sure what they will do and what they can do, but so far it looks like the current security measures is not working. If they have to make a deal with Iran, I don't think China would step in, probably U.S. will stay in here, but certainly this war is changing the region. And there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
So most recently, the U.S. proposed a 15-point concession plan, and then Iran responded with its own 5-point concession plan, both rejected on both sides.
Yeah.
Do you foresee sort of something within the immediate future of an agreement, and what do you think that looks like? And then more looking into the future, do you think there's a reality in which the two nations are able to come to an agreement with the possibility of renationalization of Iranian oil? Or is that sort of a side that you see that historically America wouldn't relinquish? Like they wouldn't, the West essentially wouldn't move forward with an allyship if there were nationalized.
I mean, oil is national in Iran. What you mean, the sanctions?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, Iranians certainly want sanction. They're already getting sanction relief within the war, so they don't want to end the war and get less than what they're already having. They don't want to sell less oil. They don't want to sell it for small lower price. Iran said America had. U.S. is still talking about capitulation. This is not going. This is maximalist. But some of Iran's demands are also hard to believe they would be. Like they're asking for all of the American military bases to be shut down in the region. This is also not, I don't think, feasible, even though I was just reading in the Times that pretty much all of the American bases have been damaged to the level that they're uninhabitable. So now we just have to repair them to go back. I think they have to find some resolution because the war cannot go forever. But this time, I think in June, Iran was very ready to end the war. And now the cost of war is certainly high for them. But again, as I said, the calculation is that they don't want to just finish this to go to the next one. They are willing to continue to get a more lasting settlement. Today, Ghalibaf, Speaker of Parliament, said, we don't want a cycle of war, ceasefire, war. We want to break this cycle.
Good. Yeah.
You mentioned the possibility of boots on ground conflict if the United States would invade Iran. Would you imagine that if this were to happen, it would be similar to that of, we see lots of drones taking place in Ukraine, Russia, or would this be sort of a new frontier that is more hybrid and it has both lots of boots on the ground and drones at the same time, or something else that we haven't even imagined?
Drones from which side?
From both.
So the scenario that is being laid out now are for Khark Island. Khark Island is in the Persian Gulf, and Iran brings most of its oil there, and then they put it in the ships, and then they export it elsewhere. So that's to put because now Iran is still exporting its oil. The capture of Khark Island is the aim is to put pressure on Iran so it wouldn't send its oil through the market. The other is Larak, which is an island in the in the Strait of Hormuz. In either case, I don't really see how this would promote American agenda. Because if Iran cannot sell its oil, means the oil supply in the market would be lower, which means the price of oil would go high. And then bringing troops to an Iranian island would put them in the way of harm by Iran. Iran is going to just send thousands of drones. And they don't also, even if the United States occupy the coast, Iran doesn't need the coast to. They can, from the middle of the country, it's a large country, there are a lot of mountains. They can shoot drones from the middle of the country, from the Zagros, from Alborz, from elsewhere. So I think it would endanger American soldiers for sure. And the difficulty with American option is that any of these would lead to further increases in the price of oil. It would aggravate the energy crisis. It would put pressure on Iran, but it also would more pressure on the world.
Good. Thanks. Yeah.
You spoke about previously in another
Could you
question.
speak up just a little?
You spoke about previously in another question on how the Iranians now, instead of wanting a ceasefire, refusing another war, refusing a ceasefire, wanting something more long term. How do you think that will come about, and what do you think they want for like the long term?
So as part of the negotiations they just had with Trump, part of the offers that Iranians gave was for America to invest in Iran's oil industry. This could be a guarantee. I mean, obviously you're right. There is no guarantee that because U.S. signed the deal and then violated the deal. So they cannot promise that we will not attack again. I'm not sure what would be the guarantee. This could be a form of guarantee if U.S. But U.S. has also investment in the whole Gulf region and hasn't cared about that. So, yeah, some people ask these questions from the Iranian side, like, what kind of guarantee could U.S. even give?
Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I'm curious how the power of different religious groups, how the power of the religious structure in Iran, I guess, has affected policy in the last decade or so, as well as how intellectuals and like the intelligentsia, that portion of the population, has also affected policy in recent years, particularly since I'm guessing both of those don't always align with central leadership.
What was the last thing?
Particularly since I'm guessing both of those groups don't always align with central leadership in their perspectives.
Both of the groups?
Yeah.
What?
The two groups being the religious structure, like as far as the government goes, and intellectuals within Iran.
So Iran is usually described as a theocracy because some of the offices in the government should be only taken by the clergy. But it's, in the first place, it's a political structure that just uses religion for its political purpose. At many occasions, they have changed religious rulings or have come up with unorthodox readings of the religion. So first and foremost, I think Islamic Republic is a political project that uses religion to its advantage for generating power and for creating these senses of sacrifice, devotion, we are seeing the other side here also, how the evangelicals here have been rooting for wars, and in Israel, how the Zionist fanatics have been seeing this as a holy war. All three countries are depicting this as a holy war. And for all of them, it serves a political purpose. The intellectuals have been critical of Iranian government. They have written about it. They have gone to prison. They have gone to protest. There has been a long struggle for political liberation and democracy in Iran. And intellectuals, educated people, students have been part of it. But my understanding is that wars, militarization, sanctions, campaigns of external pressure has not worked to the advantage of the domestic democracy movement in Iran. because usually when the security threat is high to a state, they just use more violence, and they also use that excuse of external threats to bring more violence, justify violence over dissidents. Even here, the Patriot Act was passed after 9/11, which was, there was a threat to the national security, and then measures were taken that many believed were violating the basic civic liberties of Americans. So this is not just about Iran. We can see this dynamic anywhere in the world. So I think transformation has happened in Iran, could happen in Iran, but it is slow. It is not to the liking of me and many other Iranians. But I don't see any other way. And this progress has been reversed or become even slower when the level of external threat has gone up. We can see it in this moment. We can also see it in 1980s during Iran-Iraq war. The moments of opening, like the reform movement, these all have happened when the level of external pressure and threat has subsided to a level. Then we see more internal elite fragmentation and infighting, some opening for mobilization. This doesn't mean that Iran would just democratize. Islamic Republic is an authoritarian, repressive regime, but the level of repression has varied throughout. Recently, in January, we saw the biggest massacre of Iran's modern history. This was similar to the violent repression of dissidents in 1980s. But 1980s was also a decade of existential threat for the Islamic Republic. This does not justify the torture or execution or any of the violence. But as social scientists, as observers and analysts, we can understand why this regime is sometimes more violent and sometimes less violent. Why there is some more opening, why sometimes there's more elite competition, why sometimes less.
Well, if you'd like to learn more about the history of this and the mechanisms of social movements, buy the book. Keep up with the Substack, etc. But please, right now, join me in thanking Professor Kadivar.